Every morning, something feeds in broad daylight and nobody stops it. Nobody even looks up anymore. It wears a name tag. It smiles for customers. It has done this so many times it no longer checks over its shoulder before it takes what isn't hers. Then on an ordinary Tuesday, someone finally checks. Not out of curiosity, out of something closer to memory. A stranger in a corner booth. Coffee going cold. A phone turned face down on the table, quietly, recording everything the smile is trying to hide. Days pass. The pattern doesn't stop. It grows bolder, careless, almost proud of itself. Somewhere a folder gets thicker. Somewhere a name from years and miles away gets written down and circled twice, waiting for its turn. The smile behind the register doesn't know any of this yet. Something has already started watching back, and it isn't finished counting. 5:16 in the morning, and the alarm hadn't even gone off yet. Marisol Reyes was already awake. She always woke like this a few minutes early, like her body didn't trust the clock to protect that time for her. Like somewhere along the way, she'd learned nobody was going to save 5 extra minutes on her behalf. So she took them herself in the dark before the day could start asking things of her. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator and down the hall. Camila's soft, even breathing. Marisol sat on the edge of the bathtub for exactly 90 seconds. She'd timed it once out of curiosity and never unlearned the number, and let herself feel tired before she had to stop feeling anything at all. Then she stood up, because 90 seconds was the whole allowance, because the day didn't wait for anyone to finish feeling things. Get Camila dressed. Pack the lunch, peanut butter, no crusts and apple cut into stars, because stars made fruit feel less like an argument. Get to Mrs. Alvarez's by 6:40. Get to daybreak by 7. Apron on, hair up, smile, ready. She used what was left to look at her shoes. The left one had a split starting at the seam, right where her little toe pressed into the leather every single shift, 10 hours a day. She'd been meaning to replace them for 2 months. 2 months of meaning to. Mommy, is today a good day? Camila at the kitchen table, swinging her feet a spoon of cereal halfway to her mouth. She asked it every morning, like she was checking the weather. Every day's a good day, mija. The lie came out smooth, practiced, the kind a mother tells so many times it stops feeling like a lie and starts feeling like a prayer. Because today, Marisol had $41 until Friday. Because the rent notice was folded into the bottom of her bag, not thrown away, not dealt with, just folded. Small, like maybe folding it small enough would make the number on it smaller, too. Except numbers didn't work that way. She'd done the math 4 times last night, gotten the same answer 4 times, which was exactly why she needed today to be good. A real one. Tips, actual tips, the kind that landed in her apron and stayed there. She kissed the top of Camila's head on the way out, breathed in that particular smell of a 7-year-old's hair shampoo and sleep, and didn't let herself linger. Because lingering was dangerous. Lingering was where the guilt caught up with her. Mrs. Alvarez's porch light was still on when they pulled up, which meant she'd been awake before 6 again, same as always. "You're early," Mrs. Alvarez said, opening the door before Marisol reached it, already crouching down for Camila's hug. "Rush starts at 7. Vivian likes me there by 6:45. Vivian likes a lot of things that aren't in anybody's job description," said lightly. But there was an edge under it, the kind that came from hearing the same complaint too many times to count anymore. Camila hugged her mother's waist quick and hard, the way 7-year-olds do when they've made peace with goodbyes, but not quite with liking them. Be brave today, Mommy. Marisol laughed, surprised into it. You're supposed to say that to me. Somebody has to. She got back in the car before she could think too hard about that. Because Camila had already noticed. Because bravery, apparently, was something a 7-year-old had learned to keep an eye on in her own mother, like a fuel gauge. Daybreak Diner sat on the corner of Ashcroft and 9th, wedged between a laundromat and a barber shop that never opened before 10. Faded yellow awning. A neon open sign, missing its O so from the street, it just read, Pen, which Marisol had always found a little funny in a tired sort of way. Inside, it was already alive. Grease and coffee and the low hum of a Tuesday trying to wake itself up. Morning, sweetheart. Eleanor Doyle. Same booth by the window every single morning for as long as Marisol had worked there, 68 years old, and sharper than half the corporate office probably. A retired school teacher. A widow. The kind of who noticed everything and simply chose most days when to say something about it. Morning, Ms. Doyle. Usual. Unless you've got something better hiding back there. Marisol smiled a real one. Eggs and coffee, same as every day. Then eggs and coffee it is. Eleanor left $10 on a $7 check, same as she did most mornings, sliding it under her saucer, fast, like she didn't want it discussed. She'd been doing that for months now. Marisol had noticed. She'd never said anything. Some kindnesses worked better left alone. Booth 7 corner. A man alone, coffee already going cold. A folder in front of him he wasn't reading. He'd walked in a little after 7, ordered eggs and dry toast, hadn't said much of anything since. Marisol clocked him the way she clocked everyone fast, automatic filed, under no trouble. Probably a tipper. Moving on. She didn't think about him again, which was the whole point, really, because he wasn't there to be noticed. He was there to watch. Across the room, Vivian called out section assignments, like she was dealing cards in a game, only she knew the rules to. Marisol got the double booth by the kitchen door, always cold, always slow. Exactly the kind of table that ate an hour and paid in complaints. The easy regulars, the ones who tipped without being asked twice, went to whoever Vivian liked that week. This week, that wasn't Marisol. By 7:40, the rush had teeth, booth after booth, coffee, refills order tickets, a construction crew arguing about last night's game. Marisol moved through it the way she always did. Fast, polite, invisible in the specific way good service is supposed to be invisible. A man at table 4 left $10 on a $12 check. Generous. The kind of tip that meant something on a day like today. She saw it, smiled, started toward it. Vivian got there first. I've got this table. Already sweeping the bill into her apron before Marisol had taken 2 steps. New corporate policy. Cash handling. There was no such policy. Marisol knew that the way she knew her own name, she'd read the handbook twice. But Vivian said it with the flat-board confidence of someone who'd never once been questioned, and questioning it out loud in front of a full dining room felt less like standing up for herself and more like stepping off a ledge, so she said nothing. Because saying something had cost her a shift last month. Because saying something the month before that had gotten her written up for attitude, whatever that meant, when all she'd done was ask a question about her paycheck. She went back to work. An hour later, a nurse in scrubs left $8 on her way out. Big tip like that needs to be logged for tax purposes, Vivian said, not looking up from the register. $8 was not a big tip. $8 was $8. It disappeared into Vivian's apron all the same. By 8, an older woman at table 12 left $20 for a complicated order, 3 substitutions, 2 remakes, never once an unkind word about any of it. Marisol had earned that 20 the hard way, and for one whole second holding it, she let herself believe it was hers. Big tip. Company needs to track these for tax purposes. Vivian already there. The lie came out so smooth, so confident, that for half a second, even Marisol almost believed it. Almost. She watched the 20 disappear into Vivian's apron and felt something in her chest go quieter than it had been a minute ago. Not angry yet, just quiet. The quiet that comes from doing the same math too many times and getting the same answer. The family came in around 8:15. A father still dusted with drywall from an early job. Twin girls maybe 6 coloring on their placemats with the crayons Marisol kept in her apron for exactly this reason. She refilled water without being asked. Brought extra napkins before the syrup disaster even happened. Crouched down to admire one very serious purple pancake like it was the Mona Lisa, because to a 6-year-old it kind of was. "Tell the nice lady thank you," the father said when the check came. "Thank you." Both girls at once, delighted with themselves. "You're so welcome, sweethearts." And Marisol meant it. That was the strange, stubborn thing about her even today, even with $41 and a folded rent notice in her bag. She meant it. The father counted out $18 on a $32 check. Slow, careful. The kind of careful that told her exactly how much $18 mattered to him, too. She almost cried right there, clearing the table. $18. Camilla's cough medicine was $11.99 at the pharmacy on Ashcroft. $18 was air. $18 was one whole night without lying awake doing math. She was still smoothing the bills flat when Vivian's shadow fell across the table. "I'll take that." "It's Vivian. It's $18. Large bills need manager verification." Vivian's voice climbed. Just enough. Just loud enough for the nearby tables to look up. "Unless you're questioning policy." And there it was. Questioning. Dropped like a threat, wearing the costume of a question, because everyone in that diner knew exactly what happened to servers who questioned things. No, I'm sorry." Marisol's hands were shaking. She hated that they were shaking. "I didn't mean... Maybe you're not management material after all." Vivian counted the bills, slowly, deliberately, right there in front of the family. In front of the twins, who'd just said thank you, and meant it. Some people just don't understand business. Marisol turned away before her face could do what it was about to do. She made it to the coffee station, ducked behind it, pressed the heel of her hand against one eye, then the other, fast before it could become something bigger. Because she didn't have time to fall apart at 8:19 on a Tuesday. Because falling apart didn't pay rent. Because if Vivian saw her cry, that would be one more thing, written down somewhere. One more excuse. She wiped her face, picked up the coffee pot, went back out. Nobody clapped for that. Nobody ever did. In the kitchen doorway, Desmond Webb watched the whole thing over the pass, spatula still in hand, jaw tight. He'd cooked at daybreak for 6 years, long enough to have seen this exact scene in different clothes more times than he wanted to count. He didn't say anything. He never did. Later plating eggs, he'd tell himself there hadn't been a good moment to step in. That was the story he told himself most days. It was getting harder to believe it. Booth 7 watched all of it. The man hadn't touched his toast in 20 minutes. His coffee had gone from hot to lukewarm to a kind of cold coffee. Has no business reaching in a diner that prides itself on refills. He'd stopped pretending to read the folder somewhere around the $18. His phone lit up face up on the table. Board review starts in 40 minutes. You're presenting Q3, Nicole. He didn't answer it. Because there was a name printed on the second line of that folder he hadn't opened. Small type company, letterhead, the kind of detail nobody in this diner would ever think to check. Emmett Calloway, Chief Executive Officer, Daybreak Diners. He'd picked this location at random. That was the joke of it. If you could call it a joke, 62 locations across 4 states, and he'd walked into this one on a whim, because it was close, because he had 40 minutes before the most important meeting of his quarter, because he'd wanted one quiet breakfast before 3 hours of spreadsheets and investor questions. Instead, he'd gotten this. I thought about the interviews he used to give back when Daybreak was smaller, when reporters still asked what made this company different. He always said the same thing. Every location should feel like somebody's kitchen. Every employee should feel like family. He'd believed it when he said it. He still did, which made this so much worse. I thought about the values printed on the back of every Daybreak card, words he'd written himself 9 years ago in an office half the size of the one he had now. Respect, integrity, community. Which was exactly why he couldn't finish his coffee. Which was exactly why his hands wrapped around a cup gone cold had curled slowly into something closer to fists until he made himself stop. Made himself breathe. Made himself think instead of feel. Because feeling wasn't going to help the woman behind the coffee station wipe her eyes fast enough that no one would notice. Too late. He'd noticed. I thought of his own mother. 2 restaurant shifts and a Saturday spent cleaning other people's houses, and a voice that came back to him now unbidden, the way it always did at moments exactly like this one. Baby, you watch how people treat folks who can't fight back. That'll tell you everything you need to know about their character. Vivian Croft had just told him everything. He picked up his phone. Not to answer Nicole. To open the camera instead, angled low across the table, and press record. For a second, just a second, he almost let it go. Almost told himself it wasn't his problem today, that Q3 numbers were waiting, that a man in his position couldn't cancel a board meeting over one bad tip. That's what the voice in his head sounded like anyway. Reasonable. Practical. The voice that had gotten him this far. Except it wasn't one bad tip. It was 4 incidents in 90 minutes, and pattern was a different word than accident. And he was the only person in that room who could do anything about it. His phone rang the second he stepped outside. Emmett, where are you? The board's all ready. Cancel it. A pause. Nicole didn't pause often. Cancel the board review. Emmett, the investors are already in the issue. Move it to Thursday. Tell them something came up. Through the glass, he watched Marisol laughing now at something one of the twins had said, like nothing had happened at all, like her hands hadn't been shaking 20 minutes ago. Tell them it's a personnel matter. Tell them it's not going to wait. He hung up before she could argue. Through the window, Vivian Croft counted the morning's stolen tips at the register. Once more, unhurried, like a woman closing out a perfectly ordinary shift. She had no idea what she'd just started. And Emmett Calloway, CEO of a company, built in part on the memory of a woman who'd worked herself to the bone. So her son would never have to feel this small, stood in a parking lot on a Tuesday morning and made a decision. He was coming back. Wednesday, 5:30 in the morning, and Emmett Calloway stood in front of his bathroom mirror in a t-shirt 3 years too old to still own, doing something he hadn't done since business school. Lying to a mirror. Not about who he was. About who he wasn't going to be for the next several hours. The suit stayed in the closet. In its place, worn jeans, a flannel shirt gone soft at the elbows, a pair of scuffed work boots he'd bought used on purpose 3 days ago, from a guy on the internet who'd probably wondered why a stranger wanted boots with someone else's wear already broken into them. He clipped on a Braves cap, added reading glasses he didn't need, let the shave he usually did every morning simply not happen. 3 days of stubble doesn't grow overnight, but it had a 2-day head start, and by Wednesday it did enough. He looked if he was being honest with himself like a man who worked with his hands and didn't sleep enough. Which this week wasn't entirely a lie. He picked a booth further from the register this time. Corner seat, sightline to everything, the tip jar, the register, the kitchen, pass the door. Marisol took his order without a flicker of recognition. Not one. Which should have felt like relief. Mostly it felt like something closer to grief because the man in the good suit had gotten a sir and a fresh coffee refill without asking, and this version of him tired-looking cheap boots got exactly the same thing. Exactly the same warmth. She treated everyone the same. That was the whole tragedy of it, really. She had nothing left over for herself, and she still had this much left over for strangers. "Morning special's pretty good," she said, setting down his coffee. "Eggs, bacon, toast, $7.99. Sounds good." Then testing something he didn't fully understand, yet himself. "You been here long?" 3 years. The lie came fast. Practiced like the good morning smile. She was protecting a job she'd never admit needed protecting, even to a stranger in a diner. "It's good work." He almost said something. He didn't, because what would he even say? "I know it isn't. I watched a woman steal your rent money yesterday, and I still let you serve me coffee, like nothing happened." He ordered eggs, watched, waited. Within 20 minutes, he watched it happen twice more. A nurse coming off a night shift left $8 folded under her mug. Gone into Vivian's apron before Marisol had even cleared the plate. A retired couple regulars, by the look of it, left 15 for a breakfast that ran them. 11. Vivian intercepted that one too, murmuring something about quarterly audits that meant absolutely nothing and worked absolutely perfectly. Each theft followed the same choreography. Vivian waited until Marisol stepped away, approached the table with the flat authority of someone reciting a script she'd recited 100 times. Pocketed the money, moved on. No hesitation, no second look over her shoulder, which told Emmett something important. Something he wrote down later in the Notes app on his phone, disguised as a grocery list. She isn't afraid of getting caught. She's been doing this long enough to stop checking. Once around 9, her phone buzzed on the counter, and she stepped half into the kitchen to take the call. He couldn't hear all of it. Just fragments, sharp ones, carried on a voice pitched lower than her usual register-side performance. "I know what the numbers need to say. Corinne, I'm handling it." Then the kitchen door swung shut, and the rest disappeared into the clatter of a Wednesday breakfast rush. He filed that away, too. He didn't know yet what it meant. He only knew it meant something. Wednesday night, Marisol sat on the edge of Camila's bed, long after the story was finished in the dark, listening to her daughter's breathing even out into sleep. $14 in tips. That's what the day had actually paid her after everything Vivian had handled. $14 for 9 hours on her feet, for the nurses $8, and the retired couple's 15 that had never made it into her apron at all. She did the math again anyway. She always did the math again, like checking a wound to see if it had actually closed. "Mommy," Camila's voice half asleep, small in the dark. "You're still here." "I'm still here, mija." "Good." A pause, breathing, slowing further. "Don't go yet." She didn't. She sat there another 20 minutes, past the point where Camila would ever know the difference, Because some nights the only thing Marisol had left to give was time, and at least that one nobody could take out of her apron. Thursday he came back different. Different jacket, no cap, this time glasses swapped for a different pair. A man who blended into a diner the way water blends into a glass. They're necessary, unremarkable. He caught the tail end of some he hadn't expected to see. 2 doubles back to back, nobody told me. Marisol was saying low to Desmond by the pass. Vivian posted it an hour ago. No warning. Desmond didn't look up from the grill. I already tried. Marisol didn't argue further. She just tied her apron tighter, like tightening it could somehow stretch the day to fit 14 hours into it, and went back out to the floor. 14 hours. Breakfast into lunch, into the start of dinner prep, with a 15-minute break, Vivian would later claim, cheerfully hadn't technically been skipped, since Marisol had after all eaten a granola bar, standing up by the walk-in. Vivian, for her part, left for 2 hours in the middle of it. A management meeting she told Desmond on her way out at the nail salon 2 doors down, still wearing her daybreak apron, visible through the salon's front window, to anyone who cared to look. Emmett looked. He looked for a long time. Noelle Cruz worked the counter that same Thursday, close enough to have heard every word of the management meeting excuse. She didn't say anything either. She'd been at Daybreak 2 years long enough to have learned the same lesson Desmond had learned, the same lesson everyone eventually learned. Say something, and you became the next target. Stay quiet, and you got to keep your hours. It wasn't cowardice, exactly. Emmett understood that, watching it even as some old-fashioned part of him wished it were simpler than that. It was arithmetic. The same kind of arithmetic Marisol did every night with her rent. People made the safest choice available to them, and Vivian had made sure the safest choice was always silence. He thought about calling his lawyer right then from the parking lot, and almost got as far as pulling up her number before he stopped himself, because he didn't have enough yet. Because a lawyer was going to ask him what he actually had. And I watched a woman get her polish redone while someone else worked a 14-hour shift wasn't evidence. It was just fury with nowhere useful to go. So he waited. Called that night instead from his own kitchen in his own clothes, feeling more like himself and less like himself at the exact same time. Tip theft is serious, his lawyer told him, but you needed bulletproof, recordings, documentation, preferably more than one incident, a pattern. A defense attorney can't wave away as a misunderstanding. I have 3 days of incidents. Then get a few more. And Emmett. A pause the kind lawyers use before saying something a client doesn't want to hear. Don't let this become about revenge. Let it be about evidence. Revenge gets you a lawsuit. Evidence gets you justice. He sat with that for a long moment after she hung up. Because she wasn't wrong, and because some small, tired, furious part of him wanted both anyway. Friday brought a different kind of cruelty. Quieter, harder to point to. She's had a rough week. Vivian told a regular, loud enough for the next table to hear, nodding toward Marisol, with an expression that managed to look sympathetic and superior at the same time. Might want to cut her some slack today. The regular hadn't complained about anything. There'd been nothing to cut slack for. But the seed was planted now the way Vivian planted. All her seeds publicly, casually, deniably. And Emmett watched the man's whole posture change toward Marisol for the rest of his meal. Watched him tip less. Watched him leave without quite meeting her eyes. Marisol had no idea why the table had gone cold on her. She just absorbed it the way she absorbed everything and kept moving. Later, much later, near the end of the shift, Vivian found one more thing to say. "Your section needs better cleaning," she announced in the particular tone she used when she wanted an audience. "Table 6 has syrup residue. Table 12 has crumbs." A pause timed. "Maybe if you focused a little more on the work and a little less on another pause worse than the first, other things, your performance would improve." There was nothing wrong with those tables. Emmett had watched Marisol wipe them down twice already. He watched her go back and wipe them a third time anyway, cheeks burning, while 3 separate customers pretended very hard not to notice. I thought this is the part that doesn't show up on a security camera. This is the part that would sound, if he ever tried to explain it to someone who hadn't watched it, happen almost reasonable. A manager giving feedback. Except it wasn't feedback. It was a leash tightened in public, disguised as concern. He wrote that down, too. Word for word, while it was still fresh before the diner's noise could smooth the edges off it in his memory. That night driving home, he caught himself feeling something uncomfortably close to guilt. Because he was lying to her, too, in his own way. Not the same lie Vivian told, not cruelty, dressed as policy, but a lie all the same. Every good egg, every something like that. Every day he sat in that booth and let a woman who was already drowning serve him coffee, without knowing he was the one man in the building who could actually throw her a rope. Except he wasn't ready to throw it yet. Not without making sure it would hold her weight when she grabbed it. Which didn't make the lying feel any better. It just made it necessary. He told himself the difference mattered. Most nights driving home, he almost believed it. Once, just once, Friday afternoon, in the lull between lunch and the dinner setup, Emmett saw something on Vivian's face that didn't fit the rest of the week. She was alone at the register, counting the drawer, and for maybe 3 seconds, nobody was watching her perform anything. Her shoulders dropped, her jaw unclenched. She looked briefly like a woman who was also exhausted, also cornered by something also doing math late at night that never came out right. Then a customer approached, and the mask came back up so fast Emmett almost doubted he'd seen it at all. He hadn't decided yet what to do with that moment. He only knew he couldn't quite let it go. It was Eleanor who finally said something. Not to Emmett, she had no idea yet who he really was. To Vivian, directly on Saturday morning, in a voice pitched exactly loud enough to carry. That girl worked through her lunch 3 days this week. Eleanor didn't look up from her crossword when she said it. I'd think a manager would notice something like that. Vivian's smile didn't move, but something behind her eyes did. We're a little short-staffed, Ms. Doyle. Marisol's a team player. I'm sure she is. Eleanor finally looked up. 68 years of looking directly at people who'd rather she didn't. Team players still need to eat lunch. I'll take that under advisement. She wouldn't. Everyone at that end of the counter knew it, including Eleanor, who went back to her crossword with the particular calm of a woman who'd said her piece, and didn't need it, acknowledged to know she'd said it. Emmett watched the whole exchange from booth 7, with something rising in his chest he didn't have a clean word for yet, because Eleanor didn't own this diner. Eleanor didn't sign anyone's paycheck. Eleanor was 68 years old on a fixed income, probably with absolutely nothing to gain, and every reason to just eat her eggs and mind her business, the way most people did, the way he himself had almost done on Tuesday, before some old stubborn piece of his mother's voice wouldn't let him. And she'd said something anyway. Later, refilling her coffee, Marisol paused at Eleanor's booth a half-second longer than she needed to. Thank you, she said. Quiet, not explaining what for, not needing to. Wasn't much. It was something. Emmett watched that too, and thought I am not the only person in this building who's been paying attention. He just hadn't realized until right now that he wasn't the first. Saturday the money problem stopped being something Marisol did math about at night and started being something she had to say out loud. She caught Vivian at the register during a lull, voice dropped low, the particular low of a person asking for something they already expect to be refused. I hate to ask, but is there any way I could get an advance just against this week's tips? My daughter needs... She stopped herself, started again. It's just a little tight right now. Oh, honey. Vivian's sympathy arrived instantly, and it arrived fake, the kind of fake that had clearly worked on someone before, or she wouldn't keep using it. I wish I could. Corporate doesn't allow advances. Maybe budget a little tighter next time. Emmett, 3 booths away, felt something in his stomach drop straight through the floor. Because Marisol had earned well over $200 in tips that week. He'd watched most of it happen. He'd watched Vivian take most of it too. She was asking for an advance on money that had already been stolen from her. And the woman who'd stolen it was standing there offering budgeting advice with a straight face like generosity itself. Maybe I could pick up an extra shift, Marisol tried. I'll see what I can do. Vivian's eyes had already moved on to the register drawer. Extra shifts go to people who show a positive attitude, though. Just something to think about. Another threat folded up small and handed over disguised as friendly advice. Marisol nodded like she hadn't just been threatened. Walked away, like her chest wasn't doing something complicated underneath her uniform. Emmett sat with his cold coffee and thought about the phone call he'd half heard on Wednesday. Corinne. Numbers. I'm handling it. I was starting to understand what handling it meant. Vivian wasn't just cruel for the pleasure of it, or not only that. Somewhere above her, someone wanted labor costs down, and Vivian had found the easiest line item in the building to cut. Not payroll, not her own hours. Marisol. It didn't make it forgivable. It made it worse in a way he was still working out how to hold. Because it meant this wasn't just one bad person. It meant there might be a system underneath her, quietly agreeing. Saturday night after the advance request conversation replayed itself in his head for the 4th or 5th time. Emmett did something he probably should have done on day 1. He opened the company's HR system from his home office, entered his own credentials. Credentials that still worked, that still opened every door in the company, because nobody had thought to build a system that questioned the man at the top and searched Vivian Croft's personnel file. 3 years at this location. Before that, 18 months at a different Daybreak location, a transfer that had, according to the file, been entirely her own request. Personal reasons. No further notes. No write-ups. No complaints on record. A performance history that looked on paper almost enviable. He sat there a long time, looking at that clean file, and felt something colder than anger settle into his chest. Because clean files didn't happen by accident. Not for people like this. Somebody had made sure this one stayed clean. He didn't know who yet. He didn't know why yet. But he closed the laptop that night with a new question added to his list right under Corinne's name, and it sat there for the rest of the weekend, like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. What happened at that other location? Sunday before the rush really started, Eleanor waved Marisol over for a moment longer than usual. "How's your girl doing, Camila, right?" "She's good. Ornery. Told me to be brave this morning, if you can believe that." Marisol laughed, tired, but real. "Smart kid." Eleanor stirred her coffee, unhurried. "I raised 2 of my own, you know. A long time ago now. There were years I couldn't have told you where the grocery money was coming from either. Marisol went still. I didn't know that. Not many people do. Doesn't come up over eggs, usually. Eleanor looked up, and for a second the crossword and small-talk version of her stepped aside for something older, steadier. It gets better. Not because it gets easier. Because you get harder to break. There's a difference. Marisol didn't have an answer for that. She just nodded throat tight and went back to work carrying something she hadn't been carrying 5 minutes before, not lighter exactly. Just less alone. By Sunday, Vivian had started looking at him. Not customers in general. Him specifically. A half-second too long, twice across the dining room. The particular look of someone doing math they didn't like the answer to. He'd been careful. Different days, different clothes, different seat, when he could manage it. But 5 appearances in 5 days is a pattern even for a woman who wasn't looking for one, and Vivian, whatever else she was, wasn't stupid. She approached his booth around 9, coffee pot in hand, though refilling coffee wasn't usually her job. You're becoming a regular. Light. Almost friendly. Almost. Good eggs. He kept his eyes on his plate. Haven't seen you around before this week, though. New to the neighborhood. Something like that. What do you do? The question landed with just slightly too much weight behind it. Not small talk. A test. His mind went for one genuinely terrifying half-second completely blank. Because the truth was sitting right there in his chest, ridiculous and enormous. I own this building. I own 62 of these buildings. I wrote the handbook. You've been breaking all week, and none of it was a sentence he could say out loud, without ending everything, before he had enough to end it properly. Construction, he said. The lie arrived a half-second slower than a comfortable lie should. He felt it. He was almost sure she felt it too. Been doing some work a few blocks over. This place is on the way. She held his eyes one beat longer than the conversation needed. Small world. She walked away. Didn't refill his coffee, actually just used the pot as a prop, he realized, an excuse to stand close enough to look at him properly. He sat very still and let his heartbeat come down out of his throat, one slow breath at a time. He made it as far as the edge of the lot before he heard footsteps behind him. Quick, deliberate, and turned to find Vivian in the diner doorway, arms crossed, watching him. Forget something, he asked, keeping his voice easy. Easier than he felt. Just making sure you found your car all right. A beat. Her eyes flicked once toward his license plate. Lots easy to get turned around in. It wasn't. The lot had 6 spaces. Found it fine. He got in, made himself pull out at a normal speed, made himself not check the mirror to see if she was still standing there. He was almost certain she was. Across the diner. Marisol caught his eye for just a second. An apologetic little almost smile, the universal server code for sorry about her, and went back to her section. Eleanor in her booth hadn't looked up from her crossword, but her pen had stopped moving. She'd noticed the whole exchange. He was almost certain of it. He left a $30 tip on an $11 check because it was the only apology he had available to give, and because some part of him needed Marisol to have one good thing out of this week that Vivian couldn't touch. He watched from his car in the parking lot for a long minute after he left, hands on the wheel, not driving anywhere yet. Because that had been close. Closer than he'd let himself admit, walking out the door, chin up, ordinary pace, a man who had nothing to hide. Except he had everything to hide. And for one heartbeat in there, she had almost seen it. I thought about the folder on his passenger seat, 5 days of notes, timestamps, a growing list of names and numbers. Thought about how close he'd come to losing all of it over one badly timed question. One more week, he told himself. Maybe less. He needed to move faster. Before Vivian's instincts caught up with her suspicion. Before somebody made a mistake that cost more than a blown cover. That night he sat at his kitchen table, with 5 days of notes spread out in front of him, and made a list of everything he still didn't know. Why Vivian had been the one to end up managing this location out of everyone in the company. Whether this was really about one manager, or about something wider that he hadn't found the edges of yet. What exactly Corinne Ashford's voice on the other end of that phone call had actually said past the 4 words he'd managed to catch. I didn't know yet how far this went. He only knew looking at Marisol's name written 17 times across 5 pages of notes that he wasn't leaving until he found out. He thought about calling it off. Just for a second, going back to being only a customer, letting the board meeting happen next week instead, letting someone else's life stay someone else's problem. The thought didn't last long. It never did lately. Because Marisol didn't get to call anything off. Camila didn't either. And if the only thing standing between them and one more month of $41 was a CEO willing to keep pretending to be nobody for a little while longer, that was exactly what he was going to keep being. Nobody. For now. Until he had enough to stop pretending for good. Vivian hadn't let it go. Emmett could tell by Tuesday. That construction guy still coming around? She asked Desmond offhand, while plating a to-go order like it was nothing. Which one? You know which one. Corner booth. Boots. A beat. Something about him doesn't sit right. Desmond shrugged non-committal, the shrug of a man who'd learned it was safer to know less than he did. Diner's got a lot of regulars, Vivian. Not that many new ones. She said it lightly. It didn't land lightly. Emmett heard the exchange from 2 booths away and made a private, immediate decision to change his order for the rest of the week. A hat swapped for no hat at all. A seat by the window instead of the corner. Small enough shifts that they'd read as coincidence rather than disguise if anyone happened to be counting. Somebody was counting. He needed to stop giving her numbers to count. Between all of it, the diner kept being a diner. That was the strange, stubborn truth of the week. Construction crews still came in loud and left generous. Toddlers still needed extra napkins. Someone's birthday got sung badly and cheerfully by 3 servers who didn't know all the words. Marisol still smiled at every single one of them, like her whole week wasn't quietly falling apart underneath the smiling. Emmett found that harder to watch than any single theft had been. Not because it was sad, because it wasn't only sad. Because some of it was real. She really did like the toddlers. She really did mean the birthday song off-key, as her part of it was. Which was he was starting to understand exactly why this mattered as much as it did. Nobody was asking her to fake the good parts. She just wasn't being allowed to keep any of what the good parts earned her. In the kitchen, Desmond watched the tension building without fully understanding its shape. He'd noticed the same customer returning too many times to be casual. He'd noticed Vivian noticing. He hadn't said anything to anyone because 6 years at Daybreak had taught him that saying things rarely ended well for the person saying them. But he'd started keeping his own mental list, too, without quite admitting that's what it was. Dates. What Vivian had said. Which servers had gone home short that week. Just in case, he told himself. Just in case somebody someday finally asked. Camilla's cough had gotten worse by Monday. Not dangerous worse. Marisol had learned the hard way, over 7 years of single motherhood, to tell the difference between a cough that needed a doctor and a cough that just needed time and honey, and patience. This one needed medicine. Real medicine, not honey. The kind with a copay attached to it, even with insurance, because nothing in this life apparently came free, not even taking care of a sick 7-year-old. She sat in the car outside the pharmacy for 4 minutes before going in. Long enough to check her bank app twice, like the number might have changed the second time. It hadn't. $51. The rent notice, the second one, now the one with a different color header, the one that used the word delinquent instead of just due, sat folded in the glove compartment, because she couldn't stand having it in her bag anymore. Close enough to touch every time she reached for her keys. There was a place 2 blocks from Daybreak. Cash advances, the sign said in letters too cheerful for what actually happened inside. She'd driven past it 100 times. She'd never gone in. She almost went in that Monday. She sat in the parking lot with the engine running, doing the math one more time. How much would it cost her to borrow $200 for 3 weeks? And how much would it cost her not to? And the numbers on both sides of that equation were so ugly that for a second, she just put her forehead against the steering wheel and breathed, because there wasn't a good option here. There was just a set of bad ones, and her job this week was choosing the least bad one, and being grateful she'd even gotten to choose. She didn't go in. Not that day. She drove to work instead, because at least at work, there was a chance, however small, of an honest $20 falling into her hands and staying there. The envelope was under her plate when she cleared table 6. Small. Cream-colored, unmarked, except for a single line in handwriting. Marisol recognized immediately careful, cursive, the kind school teachers still had even decades after they stopped grading papers. For the pharmacy. No need to thank me. E.D. Marisol's hands went still on the table. Inside, she counted it later in the bathroom with the door locked, was $60. Enough for the medicine. Almost enough for 1 week of not choosing between bad options. She found Eleanor at her usual booth 20 minutes later, still working the same crossword like nothing in the world had happened. "Ms. Doyle, I can't take this." "Take what?" Eleanor didn't look up. "You know what." "I left a tip." Now she looked up, and her eyes were kind, but absolutely immovable, the eyes of a woman who'd spent 30 years in front of classrooms, full of children who tried to talk their way out of things. "What you do with your own tip is your business. It's too much." "It's exactly enough." "There's a difference." Marisol stood there holding the envelope like it might do something unexpected if she let go of it. "I don't need charity." "Good, because I'm not offering any." Eleanor set her pen down finally and looked at her properly. "I'm offering you $60 from a woman with more of it than she needs to a woman doing the hardest job I've ever watched anyone do without complaining once. That's not charity. That's just math I happen to be able to afford." Marisol's throat did something complicated. "I can't take this. I mean it." She held the envelope back out, and this time she didn't waver. "But thank you for seeing it, for saying something to Vivian last week, too. I know that was you." Eleanor didn't take the envelope back right away. Just looked at her, a long, measuring look, the kind a teacher gives a student who's finally said something worth grading. "All right." She took it, finally tucked it back into her purse without ceremony. "But the offer doesn't expire. You remember that?" "I will." "And Marisol." Eleanor's voice caught her at the edge of turning away. "Whatever you decide to do about the pharmacy, you're not doing it alone. Even when it feels like you are. Somebody's watching. Somebody's on your side." She had no idea saying it how literally true that sentence was. Marisol walked away with her chest tight and her hands empty. No $60 richer, and somehow she couldn't have explained this to anyone lighter than she'd felt in days. Camila's cough broke on Wednesday. Marisol had found the money after all, not from a payday place, not from Eleanor's envelope, but from selling a pair of earrings her own mother had given her. A gold reel, the one nice thing she still owned, to a pawn shop 3 neighborhoods over, where nobody would recognize her. She told herself it wasn't a big deal. She told herself that twice, actually, in the parking lot before she believed it enough to walk inside. Camila slept through the night for the first time in a week. Marisol sat in the doorway of her room at midnight, just watching her breathe evenly, no cough interrupting it, and felt something in her own chest unclench for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit. The earrings were gone. Her mother had been gone 11 years now, and some days it felt like she was losing pieces of her all over again, one hot month at a time. But Camila was sleeping. That had to be worth more than gold. Friday morning, Marisol found a reason to linger at Eleanor's booth again. She's better. Camila, sleeping through the night again. Eleanor's whole face changed, softened the crossword forgotten entirely for a moment. I'm glad. Truly. I found another way. For the money. Didn't need. Marisol gestured vaguely, meaning the envelope, meaning the offer that still stood. Didn't think you would. Eleanor smiled, small and knowing. You're not the type. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. Whether it's a compliment is up to you. Eleanor picked her pen back up. For what it's worth, though needing help isn't a character flaw, honey. Might be worth learning that one before you're my age. Marisol didn't have a response for that either. She just nodded and went back to work, turning it over in her mind the rest of the shift. That same Monday, while Marisol was still worrying over pharmacy money, Emmett found himself close enough to the back office to hear real sentences instead of fragments. The office door didn't close all the way. Never had, apparently, some warped frame issue nobody had ever fixed, and he'd learned over the past several days exactly which booth put him within earshot if the dining room noise dropped low enough at the right moment. It dropped low enough at 10:15. I told you I'm handling the labor line, Vivian was saying, phone against her shoulder papers, rustling. I don't need Peachtree telling me how to run a shift I've run for 3 years. A pause. Whatever, Corinne said back. Emmett couldn't hear it. That's not fair, and you know it. Vivian's voice sharpened. You're the one who moved me here in the first place. You knew exactly what you were getting when you signed off on that transfer. Emmett's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. Because that sentence didn't sound like an accusation someone made up in the moment. It sounded like something true, something both women already knew, something old enough to have calcified into an argument they'd clearly had before. I did what I had to do to keep both of our numbers clean, Vivian went on. You wanted the Fernwood situation gone quietly. I made it gone quietly. Don't act surprised, I know how to do the same thing twice. The line went silent for a second. Then Vivian lower. Relax, Corinne. Nobody's asking questions. Nobody ever does. She hung up. Emmett sat very still, coffee going cold for the second week in a row, and let that land. Fernwood. He didn't recognize the name of a daybreak location off the top of his head, but there were 62 of them, and he didn't carry every address in his head the way he apparently should have. You wanted the Fernwood situation gone quietly. I made it gone quietly. 3 years ago, right before Vivian transferred here. A transfer the file called voluntary. Personal reasons. He'd been wrong about the file being clean. The file was clean because somebody had cleaned it. He didn't wait for the end this time. That night he pulled every record he could find on the Fernwood Daybreak, a location 4 hours north one he'd visited exactly twice in 9 years, both times for ribbon cuttings and photo ops, never once for anything real. The employee turnover for that location 3.5 years ago showed a server named Angela Ferris who'd left abruptly no exit interview on file, no forwarding information. Around the same window, a formal complaint had been filed. Emmett found it buried. 4 folders deep, miscategorized, under resolved, no action. Required alleging a manager had been withholding and redistributing tip income under a false pooling policy. The manager's name on that complaint was Vivian Croft. The complaint had been closed within 11 days, signed off by regional management. Corinne Ashford's signature was on the closure form. Emmett read it 3 times. Then he sat back in his chair and let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding since Tuesday of last week, because this wasn't one bad manager anymore. He'd known that somewhere for days, known it the way you know a storm is coming, before the sky actually changes color. But knowing it and reading it in black and white with a real woman's name attached to a real complaint that had been buried instead of investigated were 2 very different kinds of knowing. Angela Ferris. He wrote the name down. He spent an hour that same night trying to find a current number for her, and got nowhere. Old address, disconnected line, a social media profile that hadn't posted in 2 years. Whatever had happened to her after she left that complaint behind. She'd made herself hard to find, which told him something on its own. People who left quietly usually had reasons to stay quiet. I didn't stop looking. He just added her name to a list that was getting longer than he'd expected it to, that Tuesday morning 3 weeks ago, when all he'd wanted was one quiet breakfast before a board meeting. Thursday morning, refilling his coffee, Marisol paused a beat longer than usual. "You okay? You seem like you've got something on your mind lately." He almost laughed at that, almost, because if she only knew. But what came out instead surprised him with how true it was. "Trying to fix something. Taking longer than I'd like." "Yeah." She topped off his cup, unhurried for once, like the rush hadn't quite caught up to the morning yet. Sometimes the right thing just takes the time it takes. Doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. She moved on to the next table before he could answer. He sat there a full minute after she'd gone, coffee steaming in front of him, thinking that a woman who had every reason in the world to be bitter had, just without knowing it, talked her own boss through a crisis of conscience over a coffee refill. He was more sure than ever that whatever came next, she deserved to land on her feet when it did. 2 days later, the same Wednesday, Camila's cough finally broke. He caught the tail end of a different call. Vivian out back by the dumpsters this time, thinking herself thoroughly alone, phone pressed tight to her ear. "Look, Roland, it's simple. You flag the ones pulling too much in tips relative to their hourly, and you find reasons. Pooling, audits, doesn't matter what you call it. Corporate doesn't look at line items that closely, as long as your labor percentage stays where they want it." A pause. "No, they won't ask. Nobody's ever asked me." A short, ugly laugh. "You'd be amazed what people don't ask Roland as long as the numbers look right on the report." Emmett stood in the alley behind the dumpster with his back against brick, still warm from the afternoon sun, and felt something in his chest go very quiet and very cold at the same time. Roland Fitch managed the Daybreak on the east side of town. Emmett had shaken his hand at a district meeting 8 months ago, had complimented his numbers in front of a room full of other managers the exact way Corinne had complimented Vivian's, thought about the easy, congratulatory tone of his own voice that day. Great numbers this quarter. Keep it up, and felt sick at how simple it had been to say how little thought it had taken, how he'd probably said some version of that same sentence to a dozen other managers that same afternoon, without once wondering what any of them had done to earn it. Praise was supposed to mean something. He'd been handing it out like it didn't cost anything to get wrong. I walked back to his car without finishing his coffee and sat there a long time before he trusted himself to drive. That night, he didn't go home right away. He drove instead, no destination, just streets, the kind of driving that was really just thinking with a steering wheel attached to it, and ended up without entirely deciding to outside the very first Daybreak Diner, the original, the one he'd opened 9 years ago, with a loan his mother had co-signed 6 months before she died in a building that used to be a laundromat, with a menu he'd written on the back of old receipts, because he couldn't afford proper printing yet. He parked across the street and looked at it for a long time. The lights were off, closed for the night, because that was where this had started. Not the theft, not Vivian, but the whole idea of it. A place where people who worked with their hands could come and be treated like they mattered. He'd built 62 of these, told himself he was building 62 versions of the same promise, and somewhere along the way, without him ever making a decision about it, without a single meeting where anyone said out loud, "We are going to let this happen," the company had built a second quieter system running underneath the first one. A system where a manager who stole from her most vulnerable employee got protected as long as her spreadsheet looked good. A system where a complaint could be buried in 11 days if the right signature agreed to bury it. A system that had been running for 3 years in at least 2 locations, possibly more. And he was finding out about all of it from a corner booth in a disguise, because nobody inside the actual structure of his own company had ever once flagged it for him. That was the part that hurt the most, sitting there in the dark. Not that Vivian was cruel. Cruel people existed everywhere. He'd never been naive enough to think his company was immune to that. It was that the company itself, the systems, the reporting, the whole architecture of oversight he'd trusted to catch exactly this kind of thing, hadn't caught it. Hadn't even looked. Had in Corinne's case actively helped hide it, because a clean number on a quarterly report mattered more than a woman named Angela Ferris 4 hours north, more than a woman named Marisol Reyes 20 minutes from where he was parked right now. I thought about his mother again. He kept doing that lately more than he had in years, like some part of him needed her opinion on all of this, and kept reaching for it out of habit, even though she'd been gone 6 years. "You built this so nobody would ever have to feel the way you felt watching me come home too tired to talk some nights." That's what she would have said, probably. And then because she never let him off easy, not once in his whole life. "So how'd you let it get this far?" Without noticing. He didn't have a good answer. He remembered sitting there a specific Tuesday from when he was maybe 9 years old. His mother coming home from her second shift near midnight, taking her shoes off at the door, because her feet had swollen past what the shoes could hold anymore, and still asking him about his day before she'd let herself sit down. Still finding some leftover warmth for him after giving all the rest of it away to people who never once asked how she was doing. He hadn't understood at 9 what that cost her. He understood it now, sitting in a parked car outside the first restaurant he'd built. Partly so nobody else's kid would grow up watching that particular kind of tired. He'd built the building. He hadn't finished the job, which was exactly the point. Which was exactly why this couldn't just be about firing one manager anymore. He sat in his car outside his own first restaurant until almost midnight, and by the time he finally drove home, he understood something he hadn't let himself fully understand until that moment. Exposing Vivian was going to be easy in the end. Ugly but easy, one confrontation, one bad morning for her, and it would be over. Fixing what let her operate for 3 years, without anyone stopping her, that was going to take a great deal longer. And it was going to start with him, not with her, because he was the only person in the entire company whose job it had actually been to notice. He hadn't noticed. Not until a Tuesday breakfast he hadn't even planned. That wasn't good enough. Not anymore. He made a decision that night, driving home past midnight with the windows down and the city gone quiet around him. I wasn't waiting for a full month of evidence anymore. He had enough, more than his lawyer had asked for. 2 locations, 2 managers, a regional director with her signature on a cover-up, a pattern with edges he could finally see the whole shape of. What he didn't have yet was a plan for how to end it in a way that actually protected the people underneath it. Marisol, Angela Ferris, wherever she'd landed, whoever else was still out there, still doing math at kitchen tables at midnight, still being told there was no such policy in a voice confident enough to make them doubt their own eyes. I thought about Marisol's rent notice, the one he'd never seen, but somehow felt certain existed, folded into a bag somewhere, getting more urgent by the day. He didn't have much time left to be careful. This weekend, he decided. Whatever this turned into, it started this weekend. He called his lawyer one more time before he went to bed past 1 in the morning and didn't apologize for the hour. "I'm ready," he said without preamble. 2 locations confirmed. A regional director's signature on a buried complaint. I need to know how to do this in a way that protects the employee at the center of it. Not just fires the manager. Protects her. There was a pause on the other end, not hesitation. Just the sound of someone waking up enough to think properly. "All right. Tell me everything you have. From the beginning." He did. It took 40 minutes. By the time he hung up, the plan had a shape to it. Not a finished one, but a shape. He thought before he finally slept that night about Marisol clearing table 6 with a stolen $18, weighing more than it should have. About Eleanor's envelope refused out of a dignity that had nearly cost a sick 7-year-old her medicine. About a woman named Angela Ferris he'd never met, whose name now lived on a list in his phone. None of them knew yet what was coming. I intended to make sure when it came, it was worth the wait. Saturday morning. Emmett didn't wear the disguise. That was the first decision he made, standing in front of the same mirror he'd lied to 2 weeks running, no boots, no cap, no borrowed stubble. Just himself. The suit, the watch his mother had saved 4 months to buy him for his college graduation, the one he still wore on days that mattered. Today mattered. He thought briefly about calling someone a friend, a board member, anyone who might tell him this was reckless, that CEOs didn't do this, that there were cleaner ways to handle a bad manager than a public confrontation in a dining room full of strangers. He didn't call anyone, because clean was exactly the problem. Clean was how Corinne had handled Fernwood 3 years ago, and clean was how it had happened again. I wasn't interested in clean today. He was interested in true said out loud, where everyone who'd lived through it could hear it said. His lawyer had made one thing clear the night before, on the phone, past midnight. Do this once, do it right, and do it where it can't be quietly buried later. Which meant not a boardroom, not a private meeting where Vivian could deny things behind a closed door, and Corinne could smooth it into something survivable. It meant the dining room, in front of the people who'd actually lived it. He called Nicole at 7. "I need you to do 3 things today, and I need them done exactly when I ask, not before." "Okay." She didn't ask questions. 9 years working for him had taught her that tone meant don't argue, just move. First pull every incident report Vivian Croft has filed on any employee in the last 30 days. All of them. I want to know before I walk in there if she's tried to get ahead of this. A pause. Second, get HR on standby, not in the building, just reachable. The second I call. Third. He looked at himself in the rearview mirror, parked 2 blocks from Daybreak engine still running. Have security ready to escort someone out. Discreetly. I don't want a scene bigger than it needs to be. Emmett, what's going on? I'll explain everything in about 2 hours. Trust me on the order of operations. He hung up before she could push further, because if he explained it now out loud, before he'd walked back into that diner one more time, some part of him worried he'd talk himself into waiting 1 more week. And Marisol didn't have 1 more week in her. He'd watched her not have it up close for 14 days. He sat in the car outside Daybreak for 6 minutes before he went in. 6 minutes of hands on the wheel, engine off, telling himself this was simple. Walk in, say the words, let the truth do the rest of the work. Except it wasn't simple. Because somewhere between the parking lot and the front door, this stopped being about evidence and became about a woman. He'd watched cry behind a coffee station, a woman who deserved better than to have her worst 2 weeks turned into a spectacle for strangers. Until he reminded himself gently, the way you'd talk down someone else's panic, that the spectacle wasn't the point. The truth was the point. Marisol had been carrying this alone in silence for longer than 2 weeks, probably longer than 2 years, and silence was exactly what had let it go on this long. So he got out of the car. The diner was already busy when he walked in at 8:15. Saturday crowd families mostly align for a table starting to form near the door. Marisol saw him first. Really saw him, the suit, the clean shave, the watch. And for 1 full second, her professional smile flickered into something like recognition before she visibly talked herself out of it. Because it made no sense. Regular customers didn't show up looking like a different person. He gave her a small nod anyway. Not an explanation. Just an acknowledgement, one he owed her before anything else happened. She seated him at booth 7 out of habit, more than anything, and didn't ask why he looked so different today. 2 weeks of watching people's bad days had taught her not to ask questions customers weren't offering answers to. He didn't touch his coffee this time. There wasn't going to be a slow, patient wait today. He watched Marisol work for 40 minutes before anything happened. Watched her crouch down to a toddler about the shape of her pancakes. Watched her remember unprompted that the older man at table 9 took his coffee. Black with exactly 1 sugar. Watched her do, in other words, everything that had made him fall a little bit in love with the idea of this company 9 years ago. Back when he still believed good service and good treatment naturally came bundled together. They didn't. Not automatically. Somebody had to protect the second thing for the first thing to survive. He was about to become that somebody, whether Marisol had asked him to or not. He was watching for one thing, one moment, and he didn't have to wait long. 9:10. A businessman at table 6 left $15 on a $12 check, folded the receipt over it, the way people do when they don't want to make a show of generosity, and headed for the door before Marisol could even say thank you properly. Vivian was there before Marisol finished clearing the plate. I'll take that. Same 3 words. Same flat practiced confidence. The tone of someone who'd said it so many times it had worn a groove into her voice. 2 weeks of watching that exact sentence, and it still landed in Emmett's chest like something physical. Except this time he stood up. Excuse me. His voice carried further than he meant it to. The dining room didn't go silent. All at once it went silent, in a wave, table by table. The way rooms do when something in the air changes before anyone can say exactly what. Vivian turned, Bill still half tucked into her apron pocket. "Sir, I think there's been a mistake. I'm sorry." Her professional smile was already sliding into place, the one she used on difficult customers. Patient, a little condescending. "Is there a problem with your order?" "Not with my order." He walked toward the register. Toward her. Unhurried, because hurrying would have made this feel like an accident, and there was nothing accidental left in this moment. 2 weeks of Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and one very close Sunday in a parking lot, all of it arriving, finally, at exactly this. "My name is Emmett Calloway." Nothing happened for a second. Not recognition, just confusion, the particular blankness of a name that hadn't been filed anywhere useful yet. "I'm the CEO of Daybreak Diners." That landed differently. Vivian's face went through 3 things very fast. First confusion, then something like recalculation, actual visible math happening behind her eyes. Then worse than either an attempt at composure that didn't quite land. "Mr. Calloway, of course. What a surprise. We didn't know you'd be. I've been coming here for 2 weeks. He said it evenly. No theater in it, which somehow made it land harder than shouting would have. Different clothes, different days. I've watched you take money out of Marisol Reyes's apron more times than I've bothered counting past 40. The dining room had gone fully still now. Forks down. Conversations abandoned mid-sentence. Near the window. An older woman at table 4 had gone very still, one hand pressed to her chest, watching the whole thing unfold, like someone witnessing a verdict she'd been waiting years to hear. A father at a nearby booth quietly pulled out his phone and started recording, not maliciously, just instinctively, the way people do now when they sense they're standing inside something that matters. Near the door, the same construction crew that had been arguing about a ball game 2 weeks earlier. Regular same booth every morning had gone quiet, 2 coffee cups forgotten. One of them, a big man in a reflective vest, spoke up without quite meaning to. "She always take care of us right. Every single time." He nodded toward Marisol. "Didn't know none of this was happening." Nobody had. That was the whole point. Marisol, behind the counter, had stopped moving entirely. Her eyes went from Emmett to Vivian and back like she was trying to solve an equation that kept changing while she looked at it. "That's Mr. Calloway, that's a serious accusation, and I think there's context, I have recordings." He held up his phone, didn't unlock it, didn't need to. Yet the gesture alone did the work. "I have 2 weeks of dates times dollar amounts. I have you telling a customer Marisol was having a rough week when she wasn't. I have you telling your regional manager on a call. I'm fairly sure you didn't know. I could hear that her tips were really company profit margin." Something in Vivian's face cracked just slightly at that last detail, the specificity of it, the proof that he hadn't just been guessing. He didn't just describe the recordings. He played one. His thumb found the file without looking. He'd queued it up in the car, knew exactly where in the timeline it sat. And Vivian's own voice filled the sudden quiet of the dining room, tinny through a phone speaker, but unmistakably hers. "Those girls make more in tips than they deserve." He let it play 3 more seconds before he stopped it. "That's you," he said. 2 days ago. Talking about Marisol like she was a line item instead of a person." Marisol made a small sound somewhere between a gasp and something that had no name. But she didn't fold. Not yet. "Mr. Calloway, please." Vivian dropped her voice, tried something softer, something almost pleading. "Can we discuss this privately? There's no need to make a scene in front of customers." "There's every need." He didn't lower his own voice to match hers. You made a scene in front of customers every single time you took money from her in public and called it policy. I'm just returning the favor. A few nearby customers made small sounds of surprise, not quite gasps, something quieter. The sound of people realizing they were about to witness something they'd be talking about for weeks. 3 years. Vivian's voice climbed desperate now. 3 years of exceeding every target this company set for me. Do you have any idea what it takes to run a location like this? The hours, the people who don't show up, the inventory that walks off the customers who complain about everything and tip nothing. I built something here. You built it on stolen money. Emmett's voice stayed level. That's not building. That's theft with better landscaping. You want to talk about serious? Vivian's voice found its footing again, sharper now, the sound of someone who'd survived worse conversations by attacking instead of defending. Fine. Let's talk about the cash discrepancy report I filed on Marisol Reyes 11 days ago. Register coming up short on her shifts. Multiple occasions. It's documented. She said it like a winning hand, like she'd been saving it. Marisol's face went white. Her voice cracked. I've never once come up short. My drawer's always balanced. I count it twice every single... It's documented, Vivian said again, louder, talking over her. Emmett let the silence sit for exactly 1 second before he answered. I know. I read it this morning. Vivian blinked. Filed 6 days ago, he continued. Which is interesting because according to the timestamp, you filed it 4 hours after you asked me, a stranger you'd never met before that week, what I did for a living. 4 hours after you started wondering if the man in booth 7 was something other than a construction worker. He let that land too. That's not a coincidence. That's insurance. You didn't file that report because Marisol stole anything. You filed it because some part of you already suspected you were about to need someone to blame, and you decided in advance it wasn't going to be you. The dining room had gone from silent to something closer to electric. Desmond came out from behind the pass, wiping his hands on his apron, and didn't wait to be asked. Her drawer's always balanced. Every shift. I've cashed out next to her plenty of times. His voice shook slightly. 6 years of staying quiet doesn't unlearn itself in a single sentence, but he kept going. And I've seen Vivian take tips off her tables more times than I can count. I never said anything because... He stopped, started again, steadier, because I was scared of losing my job for saying it. That's the truth. A young man near the coffee station, Elias weekend shifts, barely out of his teens, spoke up too quieter but audible in the new stillness of the room. I've seen it too. The tip thing. I didn't know what to do about it. Vivian's eyes moved between them fast, calculating, looking for an ally, and finding none. Vivian Croft. Emmett's voice didn't rise. It didn't need to anymore. You're terminated immediately. Security will escort you out, and HR will be in touch about the rest, including the money you've taken, which you will be repaying, and the false report, which is itself a fireable offense on top of everything else. You can't. Vivian's composure finally broke fully, the mask gone. I've run this location for 3 years. My numbers... Your numbers were built on stealing from the person who trusted you most in this building. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. That's not a number I'm interested in anymore. For one long moment, nobody in the dining room moved. Then Eleanor Doyle stood up. 68 years old, crossword, abandoned on the table, and she started clapping slow at first, deliberate, the kind of applause that isn't asking permission from anyone else in the room to exist. A second later, the table behind her joined. Then the family by the window. Then half the room standing clapping for a woman who'd spent 2 weeks having her dignity quietly stolen one folded bill at a time and had no idea until this exact moment that any of it had been witnessed. Somewhere in the middle of it, absurdly, Marisol thought of Camila, of a 7-year-old voice telling her to be brave that morning 2 weeks ago, like she'd somehow known something this big was coming. She hadn't been brave, not really, not on purpose. She'd just kept getting up every morning and going to work because that was the only kind of brave she'd known how to be. Maybe that had been enough all along. Marisol stood absolutely still at the center of it, coffee pot still in her hand, and watched a room full of strangers applaud a truth she hadn't known she was allowed to say out loud. I don't... Her voice barely made it out. I don't understand what's happening. Emmett crossed to her, and for the first time in 2 weeks, he let himself really look at her without the excuse of a disguise standing between them. What's happening? He said gently now, all the courtroom edge gone out of his voice. Is that somebody finally saw you. That's all. That's the whole thing. Her eyes filled fast, the kind of tears that had clearly been held back for longer than 2 weeks, years maybe. Held back through every folded bill and every fake policy and every night doing math at a kitchen table that never once came out even. She didn't say anything else. She just set the coffee pot down very carefully, like it was the only steady thing left in the room, and let herself for one moment in front of everyone simply stop holding it together. Vivian was still standing by the register when security arrived 4 minutes later. Quiet, professional, exactly as discreet as Emmett had asked for. She didn't fight it. She just looked one last time at the room that had turned against her, all at once, and walked out into the parking lot without another word. The door swung shut behind her. She didn't look back at the dining room on her way out. Whatever she was feeling, humiliation, fury, the particular vertigo of watching 3 years of careful lies collapse in under. 10 minutes, she kept it off her face until the door closed behind her. Through the front window, Marisol watched her cross the parking lot alone, get into her car, and sit there without starting the engine for a long moment. She felt unexpectedly almost nothing like triumph. Mostly she just felt tired, in a new and different way than she'd felt tired for 2 weeks, the tired that comes after, not during. The applause slowly softened into something else. Conversation. Relief. The particular sound of a room exhaling after holding its breath for longer than it realized. Marisol was still standing at the center of it when Eleanor came over, put both hands on her shoulders, and said the only thing that seemed big enough for the moment. Well, she said, wasn't much, was it? It took Marisol a second to understand. She meant it as a joke, an echo of the same words from a coffee refill 2 weeks ago, and when she did, she laughed, wet and real, and completely unguarded for the first time in longer than she could remember. In the kitchen. Desmond leaned against the prep counter for a long moment after it was over, both hands flat on the steel, breathing like he'd just set something heavy down that he'd been carrying without realizing how much it weighed. Elias found him there a minute later. You okay? 6 years, Desmond said, not really answering. 6 years I told myself I couldn't say anything. You said something today. Yeah. He almost laughed, disbelieving. Little late, though. Better late. Elias grabbed a rag, started wiping down a counter that didn't need it, just for something to do with his hands. Better late than never saying it at all. Emmett's phone buzzed once mid-conversation. A text from Nicole Corinne Ashford calling non-stop. Says it's urgent. Should I patch her through? He looked at the screen for a second, then put the phone back in his pocket without answering. Corinne could wait. She'd had 3 years of not being urgent about the right things. She could survive 1 more hour. Later, after the dining room had mostly returned to its normal Saturday rhythm, after Desmond had gone back to the grill with something lighter in his shoulders, after Elias had been thanked by name for the first time in longer than he could remember, Emmett found Marisol by the coffee station, the same spot where she used to hide her tears for exactly as long as she could afford to. "I owe you a real conversation," he said, "about what happens next. Not today, you've had enough happen today. But soon." She nodded, still a little dazed, like the day hadn't fully finished arriving yet. 2 weeks, she said quietly. "You watched all of it for 2 weeks?" "I did." "What happens to my job?" she asked, quieter now, some old fear resurfacing out of habit, even here, even now. "Am I going to get in trouble for any of this? For not saying anything sooner?" The question broke something in his chest a little hearing it. 2 weeks of watching her get blamed for things she hadn't done, and her first instinct, even now, even after everything, was to brace for more of the same. "No," he said firm enough that he hoped it would actually land, actually stay. "You're not in trouble. You didn't do anything but survive something you shouldn't have had to survive alone. Nobody in this building is losing anything today except the person who earned it. Then what happens now?" No. He almost smiled for the first time since he'd walked in. Now you go finish your shift, because I imagine Table 9 still wants his coffee. And later this week, you and I are going to sit down and talk about what comes after. Properly. Not standing at a coffee station with half the neighborhood still watching. Why? I thought about his mother, about a Tuesday breakfast. He hadn't planned about a folder full of names that had started with 1 and ended with more than he'd wanted to find. Because somebody watched my mother work herself half to death and never once did anything about it, he said. I wasn't going to let that happen twice in one lifetime, not if I could help it. Marisol didn't have a response for that. She just looked at him for a long moment, like she was seeing finally the whole shape of the stranger who'd been sitting in booth 7 for 2 weeks. Then she picked the coffee pot back up because there were still tables to serve, because the day wasn't over, because some things, the good, stubborn things about her, hadn't needed rescuing at all. They'd just needed somebody to finally notice they were there. By noon the diner looked almost exactly like it had 2 weeks ago. Same booths, same grease and coffee smell, same Saturday crowd cycling through. Almost exactly the same. Except Marisol moved through it differently. Now. Not lighter, not yet healing, wasn't going to work that fast. But steadier, like a woman who'd just found out the ground under her feet was more solid than she'd been told it was. Eleanor stayed until her 3rd coffee refill, longer than usual. Crossword forgotten entirely on the table in front of her. You did good today, she told Marisol on her way out, patting her hand the same way she always did. But you did. She didn't say who she meant by both. She didn't have to. 3 weeks later, Corinne Ashford sat across a conference table from 3 people who had never once in 9 years needed to sit across a table from her before. Emmett didn't raise his voice. He'd learned over the last month that he didn't need to anymore. You signed off on Fernwood. He slid a single sheet of paper across the table, the closure form her signature circled in red, a detail he hadn't needed to add, but had added anyway. 11 days from complaint to closure. No investigation on file. No interview with the employee who filed it. Just a signature and a problem that disappeared. Corinne's hands were folded very tightly on the table. I was managing pressure from above me too, Emmett. You don't understand what the numbers. I understand exactly what the numbers cost. His voice stayed level, though something underneath it had gone very cold. A woman named Angela Ferris left this company because of what you buried. A woman named Marisol Reyes almost lost her housing because you taught Vivian Croft that burying things worked. You're suspended effective today, pending a full review. Whether you have a job after that review depends entirely on what else that review finds. By the following month, every Daybreak location in 4 states had a new hotline number laminated and posted in every break room, a direct line to corporate that bypassed regional management entirely. 62 locations, 62 break rooms. Emmett had insisted on installing them himself one at a time, driving to locations he hadn't visited in years, standing in kitchens, shaking hands with cooks and servers, who had no idea, most of them, what had started all of it. I didn't tell most of them the whole story. He just told them the number worked and that using it would never cost them anything. Some of them didn't believe him. He understood why. He was working on that too. The review took 2 months. In the end, Corinne wasn't fired outright. The board wanted to avoid the appearance of scapegoating a single person for what was undeniably a broader failure. But she was moved into a role with no direct authority over any location's staff, no signature power over any complaint ever again. A demotion dressed as a lateral transfer. Everyone in the building understood exactly what it actually was. She sent Emmett one email after it was finalized. 3 sentences long. I made a mistake I'll regret for a long time. I'm sorry it took losing something to understand what handling it quietly actually cost people. I hope Marisol is doing all right. He didn't write back right away. When he did, it was short, too. She's doing better than all right. She's building something the rest of us should learn from. Roland Fitch resigned before the investigation into his location finished. Nobody was surprised. Corinne's suspension became permanent 3 weeks later, once the review found 2 more buried complaints, going back further than anyone had wanted to look. Emmett didn't take satisfaction in any of it exactly. It felt more like setting down something heavy he should never have been carrying in the first place, necessary, overdue, and nothing to celebrate. Vivian Croft's labor hearing happened on a Thursday in a government building that smelled like old carpet and coffee that had sat too long on a burner. Marisol sat in the 3rd row, hands folded in her lap, and gave her statement in a voice that only shook a little. She told me there was a corporate policy about cash management, she said, when the hearing officer asked her to describe what happened. There wasn't. I checked the handbook myself twice because I didn't trust my own memory by the end of it. That's what 2 weeks of it does to you. You stop trusting things you know are true. The hearing officer wrote something down. Vivian across the room stared straight ahead and didn't look at her once. Emmett didn't testify at the hearing. His lawyer had advised against it. Said his presence risked turning a labor dispute into a media circus. Neither Marisol nor the company needed, but he sat in the hallway outside for the full 4 hours anyway, on a hard plastic chair, because Marisol had asked him to be nearby, and because there wasn't anywhere else he'd rather have been. When she came out pale but steady, he didn't ask her how it went. He just stood up and said, "Want to get some real coffee? Not diner coffee, actual coffee." She almost laughed. "Is that a joke about my own restaurants? Every restaurant's coffee is bad when you're the one who has to drink it after a day like this." He held the door for her. "Come on, my treat." It took 6 weeks for the final ruling. Restitution in full plus penalties. A permanent note in the state's employment record that would follow her to any job requiring one. No criminal referral in the end. Her lawyer had argued hard for that and won it, but everything else stood. Marisol read the ruling twice sitting in her car in the Daybreak parking lot, and felt something settle in her chest that she didn't have a clean word for. Not joy, exactly. Not exactly relief, either. Just the particular, solid feeling of being believed in writing by people who had no personal reason to believe her at all. The letter came 2 weeks after that. Actual paper. Actual stamp. An address in a town 4 hours north Marisol had never heard of before this year. Ms. Reyes. You don't know me. My name is Angela Ferris. I used to work at the Daybreak in Fernwood a few years back under a manager named Vivian Croft. I heard what happened at your location. I heard she tried something similar to what she tried on me, and that this time, somebody actually did something about it. I want you to know I believe you. Every word of it. I know exactly how it feels to have someone smile at you while they take money out of your hand. And I know exactly how it feels when nobody with any power seems interested in stopping it. I left that job. I didn't have anybody watching back then. I'm glad you did. I hope you're doing all right. Angela Marisol read it 3 times before she set it down on the kitchen table. Camila's homework spread out beside it, the ordinary evening noise of the apartment going on around her. She thought about a woman 4 hours north who'd carried this alone for 3 years, who'd made herself hard enough to find that even a CEO with unlimited resources had needed weeks to trace her. She got a pen, wrote back that same night, "Dear Angela, I believe you too." The promotion came formally 2 months after the reveal assistant manager, a title she'd repeated to herself in the mirror a dozen times before she believed it was actually hers to say out loud. The healing did not come on the same schedule. She still counted her register twice every shift, even now. Even with nobody standing over her shoulder, waiting to accuse her of anything. Old habits didn't understand that the danger was gone. Her body kept flinching at footsteps behind her for weeks after Vivian left some animal part of her brain, still bracing for a voice that wasn't coming back. She woke up at 2 in the morning, more nights than she wanted to admit, doing the old math out of pure muscle memory. How much did I make? How much is actually mine? Before she remembered every single time that nobody was taking it anymore. That the math came out clean now. That clean was allowed to be true. There was a bad week near the 2-month mark that nobody talked about much afterward. A new regional auditor came through. Teen scheduled months in advance. Nothing to do with Vivian at all, and asked to review the register logs from Marisol's section. Standard procedure. Every manager went through it eventually. Marisol found herself in the back office at midnight, the night before, going through 6 weeks of receipts by hand, checking and rechecking numbers that had already been checked by the actual accounting software, because some part of her brain refused to believe a computer instead of her own shaking hands. Desmond found her there at midnight, brought her a coffee she hadn't asked for, and didn't say anything about it directly. "Numbers are fine," he said instead, setting the cup down. "They were always going to be fine. You know that." "I know that with my head." Yeah. He understood exactly what she meant, because 6 years of his own silence had taught him plenty about the gap between knowing something and believing it. Head's usually the last part to catch up. The audit came back clean, obviously. It always was going to. But she kept the coffee cup Desmond had brought her, washed it out, and left it on her desk after that. A small, stupid private reminder that somebody had noticed her spiral and shown up anyway, instead of just telling her to calm down. "Is it supposed to still feel like this?" she asked Eleanor one slow Tuesday morning, 3 months in, when the question finally found its way out of her. "Like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like this is a mistake somebody's going to notice and take back." Eleanor set down her crossword properly, this time folded closed, which she almost never did. I taught 4th grade for 31 years, she said. Best reviews in the building every single year. Parents used to request me specifically. And every single contract renewal I sat in front of a principal, always a man. And in those days, always who acted like he was doing me a favor by keeping me on. I didn't know that. Nobody asks old women what their careers were like. Eleanor said it without bitterness. Just fact the way she said what things. In 1974, I found out a man who'd been teaching 2 years less than me, with worse reviews than me, was making $4,000 more a year. I asked about it. Once. Got told I should be grateful to be working at all, given I had a husband providing for me. What did you do? Kept teaching. Kept being the best one in that building, year after year, because it was true, and because it was mine, no matter what they paid me for it. She picked the pen back up, though she didn't open the crossword yet. It took 11 years, and a lawsuit 3 other women, and I filed together before the pay gap actually closed. 11 years, Marisol. I was 46 before I made what I was worth at 28. Marisol didn't say anything for a moment. I used to tell myself it was temporary. Eleanor added, quieter now. Just this year. Just until things change. You'd be amazed how many years you can talk yourself through with just this year. So no, she said gently now. It's not supposed to still feel like this, but it's not unusual that it does. Getting believed doesn't erase the years you weren't. It just gives you somewhere solid to stand, while the rest of it catches up. How long did it take for you? Longer than I wanted it to. Eleanor's smile was small, a little rueful, entirely honest. But it did happen. One ordinary Tuesday, I woke up and realized I hadn't braced for anything in longer than I could remember. You'll have one of those mornings, too. You just don't get to pick which one it is. Camila noticed the change before almost anyone. 7-year-olds are like that. They don't have the vocabulary for what's different. Just the certainty that something is. You don't check your phone as much at dinner anymore, she said one evening. Matter of fact, the way kids deliver observations that adults spend years working up the nerve to say. I guess I don't. It's nice. Camila went back to her mac and cheese like she hadn't just said something that made her mother's throat go tight. You seem less far away. Marisol thought about that phrase for a long time after Camila went to bed. Less far away. As good a description as any of what 2 weeks of theft and 2 months of healing had actually cost her. Some part of her had gone far away, protecting itself, and it had taken this long, this slowly to come all the way back. Elias got his own quiet victory, too, one nobody made a plaque for. He asked 3 months in if he could switch from weekends only to a real schedule enough hours to start saving for community college in the fall. Marisol approved it the same day. No committee, no hesitation, the exact kind of decision that used to take Vivian a week of manufactured drama to avoid making. That's it? Elias asked, half expecting a catch. Just yes. Just yes. Marisol almost laughed at his surprise. That's supposed to be how this works. He grinned the rest of his shift. 6 months after the morning Emmett Calloway walked into a diner in a cheap disguise and ordered eggs he barely touched, Marisol Reyes stood in front of a training room full of new hires from 3 different Daybreak locations, holding a folder she'd written herself. Every new employee's rights at Daybreak Diners, the cover read. Plain language, no corporate jargon. She'd insisted on that part, specifically had fought a mild, polite battle with the legal department to keep it readable by an actual exhausted person on their first day of work, not just defensible in court. Tips belong to you. Always. No manager touches them for any reason ever without your presence and your signature. If anyone tells you otherwise, here is a phone number that goes directly to corporate. Not your manager, not your manager's manager, straight to the top. And calling it will never under any circumstances cost you your job. She'd written every line of it herself some nights at her kitchen table. After Camila was asleep, using language she wished somebody had handed her 2 years' worth of exhaustion ago. "Any questions?" she asked the room. A young woman in the second row raised her hand, 22, maybe nervous in the specific way of someone on day one of a job they needed badly. "Has this actually happened here? The stuff in the handbook?" Marisol thought about how to answer that. Thought about $18 folded on a table, about a phone call, about her daughter's medicine, about a coffee station where she used to hide for exactly as long as she could afford to. Yes, she said simply. "It happened to me. That's exactly why the handbook exists." The room went quiet in the particular way rooms go quiet when something true lands in them. Another hand went up near the back. An older man this time, maybe 50, clearly new to restaurant work, a little embarrassed to be starting over at his age. "What happens if we report something and it turns out to be nothing? Just a misunderstanding." Then it was a misunderstanding, and nobody loses anything for asking. Marisol had thought out this question a lot, actually, in the months of drafting. The whole point is that asking should never be the dangerous part. Being wrong isn't dangerous. Silence is what's dangerous. I know that better than almost anybody in this room. That evening, Daybreak's Peachtree location reopened after a full renovation, new paint, a transparent tip jar on every table, with a sign explaining exactly where the money went, a plaque by the door with 3 names on it: Marisol Reyes, Desmond Webb, Elias Brooks, the staff who'd stayed and rebuilt something worth staying for. The dining room glowed that evening in a way it never had during a regular Tuesday rush string lights. Someone had hung along the ceiling beams the smell of a proper catered spread. Instead of griddle grease, a low hum of conversation and laughter that had nothing anxious underneath it at all. Nicole came standing near the back with a glass of sparkling cider, watching Emmett work the room with something like quiet pride on her face. 9 years of watching him build spreadsheets, and this was the first opening she'd seen him actually enjoy. A card arrived by mail that same week, postmarked 4 hours north. "Wishing you all the best on the reopening. So glad something good came out of something so hard. Angela." Marisol taped it inside the manager's office, right above the desk, where she'd see it every single shift. Marisol had one seat reserved at the ribbon cutting that nobody else knew the significance of. Booth 7. Eleanor arrived at 6 sharp in a blue dress Marisol had never seen her wear. Crossword nowhere in sight. "Guest of honor," Marisol said, walking her to the booth herself. "I made Emmett put it on the program and everything. I only left an envelope you didn't even take." "You left a lot more than that." Marisol's voice caught just slightly, the way it still did sometimes when she let herself feel the whole shape of the last 6 months at once. "You were the only person in this building who saw me before anybody else did. I don't forget things like that. I'm not going to." Eleanor didn't say anything clever back. She just reached over and squeezed Marisol's hand, the same quick, warm touch from the first morning of this whole story, and let it say what it needed to say, without any words attached. Across the room, Camila 7, going on 8, now allowed to stay up late for the occasion, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, is today a good day?" Marisol looked around the room. At Eleanor in her blue dress. At Desmond laughing with the new cooks he was training. At Elias, no longer the nervous weekend kid running the floor with an easy confidence that hadn't been there 6 months ago. At a room full of people who got to keep what they earned, now every single shift guaranteed. Yeah, mija. She meant it all the way down for the first time she could remember saying it. Today's a really good day. Late that night, after most of the guests had gone home, Emmett stood alone for a moment outside the restaurant, looking back through the window at the last few people still lingering, Marisol laughing at something Eleanor had said, Camila asleep against her mother's shoulder, Desmond and Elias closing out the register together. Easy, unhurried, nobody watching over anybody's shoulder, waiting to catch them at something. I thought about his mother the way he still did most days, though it hurt less now than it used to. You did all right, baby. That's what she would have said, probably standing where he was standing, looking at what he was looking at. He liked to think so anyway. He got in his car and drove home, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, didn't think about work once on the way.